So, Dan, you mentioned to me you feel like
Hey everyone, I'm here with Dan Bradley at Guidehouse. Dan and I are sitting down today to reflect on an interview that we recorded back in February before this pandemic really hit. And I wanted to get some thoughts of Dan's on things we discussed then and his kind of perception of them now. Thank you for sitting down with me today, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron.
Okay, so this first bit I want to get a reflection on in our first video.
So if you think back in the last couple of years at conferences like ETS, right, you think of the themes that we're all captivated with and thinking about, and I would categorize them as big ideas, right? Utilities shifting to know their customers more, beyond the meter, know the person behind the meter. You think about decarbonization and digitization and these big global themes that are, traversing the industry. As policy and law has caught up with the industry, both in the states, in the city level, at the global level, and driven by customers, now we're starting to see where all of these trends are coming together with the real need to implement, whether it's in New York with the Clean Leadership Community Protection Act, which is driving decarbonization down into law in the state. Now the rubber has to hit the road. This is a real target embedded in law. And how is the industry going to come together, not only from within itself, but the ecosystems around it, and with the customers that it serves to jointly go after and implement, these big challenges.
What did that mean to you back in February, and how has that maybe changed given the situation that we're in now?
Thanks. It's a good thing to reflect on. What that meant to me back when we were sitting, in a crowded conference with people walking behind us as we were filming it. What I was thinking about at the time was we had moved from a period of time where we were gathering together, in conferences and, the industries coming together and thinking of how are we going to reinvent ourselves? What is that reinvention going to look like? We touched on so many great ideas over the years. At some point, and I think 2020, going into 2020, I believe like this is the time that a lot of this stuff is becoming law, and a lot of this stuff has to become real fast. And that was going to cause a shift from that decade of talking about the big ideas to the decade of actually making those big ideas happen, which is both much more exciting as well as much more daunting than the decade of big ideas.
Absolutely. Another thing that we talked about is I asked you to pick one technology that you think will be maybe the most important in the upcoming decade, and you said,
Not because I think it is like the most critical to what I'm talking about, it's a piece and there's many other pieces, but because I think in the history of our modern society, when has there ever been two separate industries with two separate supply chains that all of a sudden become one? You have a transportation agency shifting from a 100-plus-year-old supply chain into the utility supply chain, and the costs and the use and the benefits of interacting with that system reverberate through the industry, touch customers, hit rates and regulatory in ways that I think we are yet to see play out. And that is just exemplifies, I think, the implementation challenge we have before us in this decade of implementation ahead.
so my question is your pick still electrification of transportation? And what do you think that means now, given COVID and the global pandemic?
So I think maybe the supply chain aspect of that is interesting because the global supply chains today in the electric utility industry and many different industries are being impacted in ways that we weren't forecasting or predicting. In fact, global supply chains are affecting, I think, our ability to implement rapidly in areas like electrification of heat. Many of that equipment is made in countries that are undergoing pandemic issues right now and is slowing down that supply chain. But I think I'm going to stick today with electrification of transportation. It's just such a physical change. You can see it. And interestingly enough, when you think about the experience of having an electric vehicle, oftentimes it can be purchased outside of a dealership in a low touch environment, delivered to your home. you're fueling it up in your garage without a glove, right? You're not having to leave it. So in many ways, I think that industry in particular is a bit ahead in terms of that like light touch customer experience, and maybe that will give it a jump in the coming years.
The last point I want to reflect on is you told this story about your wife taking her car to the mechanic, and the mechanic said something along the lines of, you should just get a Tesla.
Yes.
You wouldn't be in here as often if you had a Tesla.
And I think I just hit a tipping point last week when my wife came back from getting her car serviced, and she's thinking about a new car, as hers has a lot of miles on it. And the mechanic said, well, if I were you, I would get a Tesla. Now, I can't say that to all my customers because I'd be out of business, but that's the car I drive, and I don't have to take it to my own shop.
Did you end up getting a Tesla?
We did not end up getting a Tesla. That's not by lack of desiring a Tesla. It's the prices have to come down a little bit.
What do you think what impact do you think the pandemic will have on EV adoption overall? You just mentioned EVs, you can fuel them up at home. What do you think the impact will be from the pandemic on EV adoption?
I think, as with everything right now, it depends, right? And it depends, I think, in part on policies, right? There is a groundswell of enthusiasm in our industry saying, hey, we can build a stimulus back better by building a cleaner, more efficient system that's more resilient. I think that resiliency factors in. EVs can play a big role in that. And that was the big idea. Now we're getting into the decade of implementation, so we have to make that a reality. I think if we head in that direction, I'm highly optimistic. If it has to work on the economics of everything on itself, I remain optimistic. It's just probably on a slower trajectory.
So what has been your escape? I've been really enjoying asking people, what are you reading? What are you watching? Really anything. What has been your escape?
So I've been trying to I've been trying to do new things during this pandemic. I'm fortunate enough to have a backyard. I recently got into archery. I got a bow and arrow for Christmas. And at my stage in life, it's like not often do you start brand new things. Well, I started archery. My wife and I have done Tai Chi. I'd never done Tai Chi before. I've been trying to each week kind of pick a new thing to try out. And archery has stuck. Not super good, but it's always good to learn new skills.
Yeah, that's awesome. Archery is awesome. Look at you, Dan, the modern day Renaissance man.
There you go.